a dog and her handler arrived in the Bahamas carrying a responsibility that no family ever wants to see become necessary. On June 3, 2026, members of the Broward County Sheriff's Office arrived at the Abaco Inn in Hopetown. Among them was Maggie, a cadaver dog working alongside federal investigators in the search for answers surrounding the disappearance of 55-year-old Lynette Hooker. The significance of Maggie's arrival was not lost on anyone following this case. Cadaver dogs are not brought in to search for living people. They are deployed when investigators are searching for evidence associated with human remains. According to reports, Maggie had worked portions of this case before. This time, however, the circumstances were different. Authorities were no longer relying solely on the locations originally searched in the days after Lynette disappeared. They were working from new information, including GPS data that investigators reportedly recovered and analyzed in the weeks following her disappearance. That detail matters for a reason. The renewed search effort comes as federal authorities have formally designated the case as a possible foreign murder investigation involving a United States citizen. According to multiple reports, that designation allowed additional investigative resources to be deployed and expanded cooperation between American authorities and officials in the Bahamas. For months, people following this case have been asking the same question. What happened to Lynette Hooker on the night of April 4th? Now investigators appear to believe they are closer than ever to finding answers, and the reason has less to do with speculation and more to do with evidence. According to reporting cited by investigators familiar with the case, digital records recovered during the investigations allegedly do not fully align with the account that was initially provided regarding Lynette's disappearance. Those reported discrepancies have become one of the most important developments in the entire investigation, because if digital evidence points investigators toward locations that were never searched before, then every new search area carries the possibility of uncovering information that was missed during those first critical days. Before we go further, it is important to remember why this case has captured so much attention. Lynette Hooker was not a stranger passing through the Bahamas. She and her husband Brian Hooker had built a life around sailing. The couple documented their travels online through social media and videos. Friends and followers saw a couple living what many people would describe as a dream lifestyle. They traveled aboard their 46-foot sailboat, the Soulmate, spending much of their time on the water. According to public reports, they had been in the Bahamas for roughly a month before Lynette disappeared. On April 4, 2026, everything changed for the Hooker family. According to statements given to authorities, Brian Hooker reported that he and Lynette were returning to their sailboat aboard an 8-foot dinghy after spending time ashore in Hopetown. He told investigators that rough water struck the vessel and that Lynette went overboard. A search began immediately. Authorities searched the areas believed to be relevant based on the information available at the time. Hours turned into days, days turned into weeks. Yet Lynette was never found. That absence became one of the defining facts of the case. No confirmed sighting, no confirmed recovery, no definitive explanation, only questions. Now consider what happened next. Just 4 days after Lynette disappeared, the Coast Guard Investigative Service opened a criminal investigation. That decision attracted attention because the Coast Guard Investigative Service is not the search and rescue branch that most people think of when they hear the words Coast Guard. Its role is investigative. Its purpose is to examine potential criminal activity that falls within its jurisdiction. As investigators continued examining evidence, reports began emerging that GPS data recovered from electronic devices was creating new questions. According to reports cited by ABC News and CBS News, officials familiar with the investigation indicated that location information recovered from devices did not fully match portions of the account initially provided regarding the events of April 4th. Investigators have not publicly released every detail associated with that data. They have not publicly disclosed every coordinate. They have not released a complete timeline. But authorities have taken actions that appear to show how seriously they are treating the information they recovered. One of the clearest examples came when federal investigators sought permission to expand search operations into locations that had not been examined during the original effort. According to reports, officials in the Bahamas approved those requests. That approval allowed investigators to search areas beyond the original search perimeter. And those locations matter, because investigators reportedly shifted their attention toward areas northwest of Lubbers Quarters K and Marsh Harbor. That is significant, because those locations were reportedly different from areas that had previously been emphasized during earlier searches. The geography itself is important. The Abaco Islands are beautiful, but they can also be remote. There are stretches of shoreline that receive very little traffic. There are areas damaged by Hurricane Dorian that remain isolated. There are beaches accessible by small boats where very few people would be present after dark. According to reporting referenced during the investigation, some of these newly examined areas were accessible by dinghy and had not been part of earlier search efforts. Investigators now appear focused on determining whether those locations hold evidence relevant to the disappearance of Lynette Hooker. If you have been following cases like this and appreciate detailed, fact-based coverage, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps more people stay informed about active investigations and missing person cases that deserve attention. There is another piece of this story that has become increasingly important. Investigators reportedly requested DNA samples from Lynette's relatives. According to statements from family members, mouth swab samples were provided to authorities. Requests of this nature are not unusual when investigators are attempting to establish identification if evidence is recovered. For Lynette's family, however, the request carried emotional weight. Every family hopes for a different outcome. Every family wants a loved one to come home. Yet investigators have a responsibility to prepare for every possibility, as difficult as that reality may be. The DNA collection was only one part of a much larger effort. Authorities also brought in forensic divers. These are specialists trained not simply to search underwater environments, but to recover evidence under challenging conditions. Together, forensic divers, federal investigators, local authorities, and Maggie, the cadaver dog, became part of a coordinated operation focused on answering the same question: what happened to Lynette Hooker? One of the most closely watched developments involves the dinghy itself. According to reports from CNN and Fox News Digital, federal authorities took possession of the 8-foot dinghy involved in the events of April 4th. At first glance, that might sound like a routine investigative step. But experts interviewed about the case suggested the vessel could potentially provide important forensic information. According to forensic specialists cited in reporting on the investigation, decomposition-related compounds can leave traces in surrounding materials under certain circumstances. Cadaver dogs are trained to detect those compounds. The purpose of examining the dinghy is not to prove a theory, it is to test evidence. Investigators are attempting to determine whether anything within that vessel supports or contradicts existing accounts of what happened. That distinction matters. Evidence exists independently of opinions. It exists independently of assumptions. And investigators appear determined to follow wherever that evidence leads. As of today, no charges have been filed against Brian Hooker. He has publicly denied harming his wife. His attorney has stated that he is cooperating with investigators. Authorities have not announced an arrest. Authorities have not publicly identified a suspect. Authorities have not publicly reached final conclusions. Those facts remain critically important. At the same time, investigators continue pursuing evidence because unanswered questions remain, and some of those questions are becoming harder to ignore. How significant do you believe the GPS evidence could be in a case like this? Let me know in the comments below. As the search continues, several facts stand out. Federal investigators expanded the search area. Specialized divers were deployed. DNA samples were collected. The dinghy was taken into custody. A cadaver dog was brought back to the Bahamas. Each step reflects a continuing effort to understand what happened during the hours surrounding Lynette's disappearance. For Lynette's family, these developments represent something more personal than investigative milestones. They represent hope for answers, not assumptions, not rumors, answers. Because regardless of what the evidence ultimately shows, a family is still waiting. A daughter is still waiting. Parents are still waiting. And until investigators can establish exactly what occurred, the central question remains unresolved. The strongest evidence in this case has not come from interviews or speculation. It has come from the continued effort to compare statements, digital records, search results, and forensic findings. That process is still underway. The investigation remains active, and the outcome remains uncertain. What investigators ultimately discover in these newly searched locations may answer questions that have existed since April 4th, or it may create entirely new ones. Either way, the next phase of this investigation appears to be one of the most important since Lynette Hooker was first reported missing. If you have followed this case from the beginning, share this video with someone else who may be interested in the search for answers. Subscribe if you would like continued coverage of active investigations. And before you go, consider this question. If the evidence eventually provides a definitive answer, what do you think will prove to be the single most important clue investigators uncovered along the way? For Lynette's family, that answer cannot come soon enough.